Good day, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Skarensky and welcome to the review of Trials of Mana, the remake of Seiken Densetsu 3. As the name implies, this is the third chapter in the Mana series, originally published on the Super Famicom in 1995, and along Rise of Mana, it is the only game of the series to never get an official English release. It must be noted that several Mana titles went as far as America but never landed in Europe. Seiken Densetsu 3 finally reached a worldwide audience in 2019, when Square Enix released Collection of Mana, a compilation of the first 3 games in the series. There, it received an official English translation along the title of Trials of Mana. Not enough, Square Enix announced a full 3D remake, which is the subject of this review. Simply known by its new English title, it is available on PC, PlayStation 4 and Switch. The review will use the latter for footage, and yes, it is the technically worst version of the game, lacking a lot of visual flair and frame rate of other platforms, but the port itself is decent and very well playable. Trials of Mana has 6 playable characters, each with his or her own reason to seek the fabled Sword of Mana. Before beginning the game, you select the main character that will drive the story and 2 companions. These companions will change secondary events, some dialogues and even bosses, introducing you and the party leader to their storyline, but without fully exploring it. To see everything you need to play with all 6 characters as party leaders, but you will be able to piece together the vast majority of events by going through the game twice with a different party. Trials of Mana is not particularly long, less than 20 hours to complete the main story and around 3 more to defeat the post-game boss. Doing so will open up New Game Plus, in which you will keep everything from the previous playthrough, with the exception of character classes and levels, and receive skills based on the previous party, including a massive 300% experience boost that will let you breeze through NG Plus with ease. Trials of Mana is a rather linear experience. There aren't many side quests or ancillary activities even when you get the ability to travel the world as you see fit. The progression in the remake is made even more straightforward by a marker showing precisely where to go. I kinda like this arrangement. It does remove the excitement of the exploration but allows you to wander around dungeons and cities without unwillingly triggering the next event. Some might scorn this marker, but unfortunately there is no way to remove it. What you can remove is the next objective, normally shown under the minimap. That is retold by map and loading screens, so it shouldn't be a big problem. Other options include a rearranged or 16-bit soundtrack. Rearranged tracks sound very close to the original version, but I think the Super Famicom originals have a very slight edge over the rearrange. Some of the new tracks are more subdued and don't leave a lasting impression as their originals do. The graphics are lovely, with characters, enemies and environments receiving the same amount of care, although cities do tend to repeat textures and elements a bit. Some of the later locations are rather impressive, even on the Switch, where terrain and environment textures can be quite blurry. Unfortunately, animations vary greatly in quality, and a lot of them are reused through and through, and at times on different characters. Hawkeye's and Duran's smile animation looks suspiciously similar. There aren't that many enemies as well, though they are a very faithful representation of the original sprites. The game on Switch performs decently enough in both docked and handheld modes, although docked mode has that distinctive blur of upscaled resolution. While docked, Trials of Mana has either a slightly higher resolution than handheld or applies anti-aliasing to 720p. Performance is slightly better when docked, as you'll experience lax texture pop-ups typical of the Unreal Engine. Trials of Mana supports surround setups, but voices are mixed in the stereo channel and rear speakers are used, very sparingly, by environmental noises. As typical of Mana games, combat is in real time. The remake adds a very simple combo system which expands when characters change classes, a jump to reach flying enemies, and easier access to spells, special attacks and items. The point distribution system has been completely revamped. Investing enough point in a stat not only improves it, but also unlocks new offensive and defensive abilities. Combat feels good, controls are responsive, and there is enough variety between characters to keep things interesting. Characters more or less represent different classes, and all come with a preset way to fight which I highly suggest to tweak based on your party composition. By default, characters won't use restorative items, and without Charlotte in your party, the only dedicated healer, you will have to pay attention to everyone's health, which can become cumbersome. The real highlight of Trials of Mana's combat system are the classes. At predetermined levels, characters can change to a superior class, chosen between two. These classes offer very different, often opposite, playing styles, and the game also gives the chance to revert progression to try out things. If you are a bit familiar with the Super Famicom version or action games in general, Trials of Mana will not offer much of a challenge in normal mode. I'd say that in the whole game there are 3 difficult bosses, and one of them is due to the camera being too close to the action and AI characters unable to evade boss attacks efficiently. The difficulty curve is also all over the place. You might struggle against a boss while the next 4 will go down with ease. You are always a couple of levels or more above standard enemies, and resources will only be a problem during the post-game dungeon, which is too long for its own good, being comprised of old locations with small modifications and inhabited by the same enemies as in the main game. With the exception of a couple, dungeons aren't particularly complex to go through, and puzzles will rarely go farther than activating a switch to open a door. You will revisit some locations in your journey, but when that happens you also get the ability to warp to the overworld whenever you want. The game initially showers you with restorative items that won't come into play until mid-game, at least in normal mode, and by the end you'll have so much money to max out all useful items and buy all the best equipment available. Though the best weapons and armors are found at random in item seeds you get for free by defeating enemies. Unfortunately, the game no longer supports 2-player mode, either locally or over the network. You can remap controls, but some buttons will always be linked to certain actions. For example, only face buttons can be used for attacks and only shoulder buttons to switch characters. Japanese voices are good, all fit their assigned characters very well. English voices are there, but they aren't particularly great. I also think Charlotte's dialogues at times go overboard with the infantilization of words. Overall, the translation is good, although I don't quite agree with all the name changes. They are typical of Japanese games from the 90s, and they should have been kept in the English localization just like all those wonderfully neon-colored outfits all-important characters still wear.
Nikita! 助けに来てくれたのか? ジェシカの様子はどうなんだ?
Trials of Mana overall progression is one from a 90s Jrpg. In fact, the whole game feels like an old Jrpg with 3D graphics. The game is clearly a work of love for the source material, but it also shows it's not a full-on remake. Dungeons and towns, with the exception of maybe a couple of instances, are a straight recreation of the original. Weapons and armor shops are in opposite parts of town, and invisible walls are used and abused to funnel the party towards their destination. Nevertheless, Trials of Mana is a pleasant game to go through. It's a faithful recreation of an old Jrpg, with a modern presentation and updates to its system to make it less clunky. Trials of Mana is a recommended Jrpg for everyone, especially those looking for an old-school experience. I hope you have enjoyed this review and you'll stick around for more. Briareos Kerensky, over and out.
こんな力があったなんて。
Simply known by its new English title, this remake gives Western players the opportunity to know who Reese is and why all those tiny books show her in all possible by horrors that would make her wish those were just with huge only intent in inside her.